the forgotten pharaoh who erased his own name from every temple. Hey there, friends. Welcome back to another long, slow wander through the dusty corners of history. Tonight we are going deep into ancient Egypt around 1350 BC when one pharaoh decided to burn down 3,000 years of tradition just to stare at a sun disk all day. Dim the lights if you have not already. Get comfortable under the covers. Maybe a soft pillow under your head. Because we are talking about the forgotten pharaoh who literally tried to erase his own name from every temple wall in Egypt. Akhenaten, the heretic king. The guy who looked like an alien fashion model and made everyone draw him that way too. Of course he did. Why settle for normal when you can be unforgettable in the worst possible way? Let us start way back when everything still made sense. The Nile is flowing lazy and brown through the desert. Crocodiles sunning themselves on the banks. Farmers planting wheat under the floodwaters that come every year like clockwork. And up in Thebes, the temples to Amun-Re are growing fatter and richer than ever. The priests are basically running the country at this point. Gold pouring in from Nubia, statues taller than houses, incense so thick you can chew it. And on the throne is Amenhotep III, also called Amenhotep the Magnificent because the man could not stop building. Colossi of Memnon, Luxor Temple, half of Karnak. He just kept adding courts and pylons and obelisks like he was trying to personally bankrupt the treasury. His wife Queen Tai is the real power behind the throne though. Sharp as a flint blade, hair in that Nubian wig style, eyes that could make a general kneel without saying a word. They have a bunch of kids, but the one we care about is the second son, Amenhotep IV. Born with a long weird skull and hips that would make you wonder what exactly was going on in that royal gene pool. Because Egyptian royals married their sisters. Of course they did. Keeps the blood pure, they said. Keeps the deformities coming, we say. Little Amenhotep grows up in the palace at Malkata. Walls painted with scenes of his dad smiting Nubians and his mom feeding sacred geese. Servants fanning him with ostrich feathers 24/7. Musicians playing harps soft enough to sleep to, which is perfect because tonight is all about drifting off. He spends hours staring at the sun disk rising over the Nile every morning. Not the full sun god with the falcon head and everything, just the disk itself, the Aten, pure light, no myths, no drama, no animal heads. Just a circle with rays ending in little hands blessing the royal family. And only the royal family because why share? His dad thinks it is cute at first. Builds a few Aten temples. Lets the kid have his weird hobby. But Amenhotep IV is not playing. He is dreaming of something bigger. Something that will make every priest in Thebes choke on their incense. When Amenhotep III finally floats off to the afterlife, probably exhausted from all that building, his son takes the throne, and immediately starts acting like he ate a bad lotus. Year 5 of his reign, he changes his name to Akhenaten, meaning effective for Aten. Drops the Amen from his name, like it is radioactive. Because Amun is the big god now and Akhenaten is done with him. Done with Osiris. Done with Isis, Horus, all of them. There is only the Aten now. The one true disk in the sky. And guess who is the only person allowed to worship it directly? That is right. Akhenaten himself. The priests can go pound sand. He starts hacking the name Amun off every temple wall in Egypt. Gangs of workers with chisels going from Edfu to Abu Simbel just scraping away like mad. Imagine being a priest waking up to find your god literally erased overnight. Your whole career gone, your offerings cut off. Your power evaporating faster than morning mist on the Nile. But Akhenaten is just getting warmed up. He looks at Thebes with all its history and temples and decides nope, too much old energy. We are moving. He sails down the Nile about 200 miles to an empty stretch of desert between Thebes and Memphis. Virgin land no one has ever built on. Perfect curves in the cliffs on one side, open desert on the other. He stands there in the blazing sun and declares this is Akhenaten, the horizon of the Aten, his new capital. And he builds it fast. Temples open to the sky so the sun can shine directly on the altars. No roofs, no dark rooms anymore. Palaces with gardens and pools and painted floors showing ducks swimming through papyrus. He moves the entire court there. Thousands of people. Nobles kicking and screaming because they left their nice houses in Thebes. Workers dying in the heat laying millions of mud bricks. But Akhenaten does not care. He is in love with the sun, with his vision, and with his wife, Nefertiti, Neferu Aten. Her name means the beautiful one has come, and that famous bust did not lie. Long neck, perfect cheekbones, eyes that look like they already know you are going to disappoint her. She is not just a pretty face either. She is smashing enemies under her sandals in temple reliefs, driving chariots, making offerings to the Aten right beside her husband, sometimes even instead of him. There are scenes where she is wearing the crown and he is just standing there like a proud husband at a school play. People whisper, is she co-ruler? Is she the brains? Maybe both. They have 6 daughters, all with the same long skulls and pot bellies like their dad. The Amarna art style is wild. Everyone drawn with curved hips and breasts, even the men. Akhenaten especially. He shows himself with wide hips, narrow waist, big thighs. Some say it is symbolic. Some say the man really looked like that. Marfan syndrome, maybe. Or just centuries of cousin marriage finally catching up. Either way, he leans into it. Makes it the new standard. No more stiff, perfect pharaohs. Now everyone looks like melted candles. Beautiful in a creepy, dreamy way. Life in Akhenaten is strange and quiet. Morning hymns to the Aten sung soft and slow. The royal family stands on a balcony while thousands bow below. Chariots rolling through wide streets. Foreign ambassadors arriving with tribute and leaving confused because where are the old gods? Where's Amen? Akhenaten just smiles and points at the sky. The disc is there. Always there. Watching. Blessing. He writes the hymn to the Aten himself. Beautiful words, really. How the sun brings life to every creature. How night falls when it hides its face. How only Egypt sees the truth because only Egypt has Akhenaten. Arrogant as hell but poetic. You can almost hear the harps in the background as the words float over the rooftops at sunset. But cracks are starting to show. The empire is slipping. Nubia getting restless. The Hittites poking around in Syria. Tribute not coming in like it used to. The priests of Ammon and Thebes are plotting in the shadows. And Akhenaten is getting weirder, more isolated. Spending days just staring at the sun until his eyes water. Whispering to the disk like it whispers back. Nefertiti is seen less and less. Some say she died. Some say she fell out of favor. Some say she put on a fake beard and became the next Pharaoh Smenkhare. Because why not? The whole family already looked halfway androgynous. Their daughters growing up in this bubble. Marrying their dad maybe, because that is still a thing. Nefertiti the eldest becomes great royal wife at like 12. Because of course she does. The gene pool is now a puddle. And then Akhenaten starts the strangest part of all. He orders his own name chiseled off certain walls. Not everywhere. Just specific places. Secret chambers behind the main temples. Rooms no one is supposed to find. Scribes working by lamplight, carving words that say, I am no king. I am the sun's shadow. The light passes through me, but I am nothing. The Aten is all. Humility or madness. Hard to tell. Maybe both. He knows it cannot last. Knows the old gods are waiting. Knows that when he is gone, they will come for his memory like jackals. The sun keeps rising over Akhenaten every morning, exactly the same. Golden discs sliding up between the cliffs like it has an appointment. The rays stretch down in those little stone carvings with tiny hands holding ankhs to the noses of the royal family. Everyone still bows. Everyone still sings the same slow hymn that sounds like wind moving through reeds. But the city is starting to feel hollow. The paint on the palace walls is only 10 years old, is already peeling in the heat. Foreign letters pile up unanswered. The army commanders send worried messages from the borders, and the messages just sit there gathering dust. Akhenaten spends more and more time on the royal barge, drifting up and down a private lake. He lies under a linen canopy while servants row in perfect silence. Nefertiti is barely seen now. Some courtiers swear they saw her walking the North Palace gardens at twilight wearing a plain linen dress and no wig. Others say the North Palace is empty and cobwebs are growing across her makeup boxes. The 6 princesses grow taller and thinner. Their skulls even longer than their fathers. Little Enkisenpaten, the 3rd daughter, keeps having fevers. The physicians bleed her and burn incense and nothing helps. Akhenaten just tells them to carry the child into the sunlight because the Aten will heal her. The child dies anyway. They bury her in the royal tomb cut into the eastern cliffs. A tiny sarcophagus with a lid that shows her face, already looking tired of the whole experiment. Another daughter follows a year later, Meketaten, only 13. The reliefs in the tomb show Akhenaten and Nefertiti holding the girl. limp body while a tiny newborn lies beside her because she died in childbirth. The father of the baby is never named. Everyone in the court pretends not to notice that it was probably Akhenaten himself. The relief just shows the royal couple weeping under the sun disk, and the rays reaching down like they feel bad but not bad enough to do anything about it. After the funeral, Nefertiti disappears completely. Some graffiti scratched on a quarry wall says she took the name Smenkar and started wearing the double crown. Other graffiti calls her a traitor and worse. Either way, the beautiful one is gone, and the palace feels colder even under the endless sun. Akhenaten keeps building anyway. More open-air altars. More boundary stele carved into the cliffs, declaring this land belongs to the Aten forever. Forever turns out to be short. Year 17 of the reign. The king is 30-something, but looks 50. His teeth are going bad. His hips hurt when he climbs the palace steps. The long skull tilts forward like it is too heavy for his neck. He still forces himself to ride out in the golden chariot every morning, waving to the crowds that are getting thinner every season. The workers in the necropolis start whispering that the Aten is angry because the offerings have stopped coming. The old gods are hungry after almost 2 decades of starvation. Then one morning the chariot does not appear. The balcony stays empty. Servants run in and out of the great palace carrying jars of water and linen bandages. Rumors drift through the streets like smoke. The king has fallen, the king is blind, the king is already dead. The truth is simpler. Akhenaten dies quietly in his bed sometime in the late summer. No dramatic thunderbolt from angry Amen. No curse. Just a sick man whose heart gives out while the sun keeps shining like nothing happened. They wrap him fast. No time for the full 70-day mummification. The priests who still know how to do it are either old or hiding. They stuff the body with natron and resins and sew it into linen bandages painted with the same long face and pot belly he loved so much in life. They carry him out to the royal tomb in the eastern cliffs at night so no one sees. The tomb is half finished, corridors cut into the rock but the walls still rough. They place him in a red granite sarcophagus with Nefertiti's name carved on the corners, even though she is nowhere to be found. The 4 canopic jars have female faces because someone forgot to change the order. His favorite Ashabti figures are lined up ready to serve him in the next world, except they all have the Aten disc overhead and no one is sure if the spell will even work anymore. They seal the tomb with a plain stone door and roll a few boulders in front, and then everyone goes home to wait for what comes next. What comes next is Tutankhamun, a boy of 8 or 9 with the same long skull and bad teeth. Probably Akhenaten's son by one of his sisters or daughters. No one is quite sure anymore. The priests of Amun pour out of Thebes like ants from a kicked nest. The generals who have been waiting in the wings step forward. The boy is crowned in the old way with the old words and immediately changes his name to Tutankhamun, Restorer of Amen. The message is clear, party is over. They pack up the entire court and sail back to Thebes, leaving Akhenaten to the jackals and the wind. The city dies almost overnight. Mud brick houses crumble. Gardens turn to dust. The open-air temples fill with sand until only the tops of altars show like drowning islands. Workers are sent back years later to salvage whatever they can. They rip the gold foil off shrine doors. They pull the talatat blocks out of temple walls because those small, standard-sized stones are perfect for new building projects. They find statues of Akhenaten and Nefertiti and smash the faces just enough to blind them before reusing the stone. In the worker village at Dur el-Medina, someone takes a beautiful relief of the royal family under the sun, disc and turns it upside down to use as a toilet seat. You read that right. The heretic king literally wiped with for a while. The priests organize official damnation ceremonies. Akhenaten's name is hacked out of every monument his father built, and every monument he built himself. The cartouches are gouged so deep you can lose a finger in the holes. His statues are dragged into workshops and recarved into images of proper pharaohs wearing proper kilts and holding proper offerings to proper gods. The new capital is forgotten so fast, it is almost funny. Within 2 generations, children in Thebes think Akhenaten is a fairy tale. The tomb in the cliffs is robbed at least twice. The mummy is stripped of amulets and gold bandages and thrown in a corner while the thieves argue over the coffin. Eventually, some well-meaning priest in the chaotic 3rd intermediate period finds the bones and moves them to a safer storage. They end up in KV 55A side tomb in the Valley of the Kings with a mishmash of other royal leftovers. The face is already gone. The name on the coffin has been scratched out. No one is sure whose body it is anymore. Just another deformed king from a bad dream, and the city keeps surrendering to the desert. Sand drifts through the great temple, filling the offering tables until they look like shallow ponds. Scorpions nest in the palace bedrooms. The boundaries steely weather and crack until the proud declarations are unreadable. Only the cliffs remain exactly the same, watching the experiment come and go, like they have watched everything else for millions of years. Fast forward 3,000 years and the desert has done its job perfectly. Akhenaten is gone. Just low mounds and broken pottery that only archaeologists get excited about. The name Akhenaten itself is a ghost. Egyptian king lists skip from Amenhotep III straight to Horemheb, like someone ripped a page out of the book. Children in Cairo grow up memorizing Ramses this and Thutmose that, and never hear about the weirdo who tried to cancel every god except a glowing frisbee in the sky. Even the priests won. Amen is back on top. Temples richer than ever. The old hymns echo through Karnak again, exactly like nothing ever happened. Then comes the 19th century, and a bunch of Europeans with terrible hats start poking around Egypt, looking for treasure and bragging rights. They find bits and pieces. A boundary stela here, a talatat block reused in a later pylon there. Someone digs up a private tomb with those creepy melted candle family portraits still painted on the walls. Scholars start scratching their heads. Who is this guy with the women's hips and the sunbeams with hands? Why does his wife look more powerful than him? Why is everyone's skull shaped like an eggplant? They start calling him the heretic pharaoh because that is easier than admitting they have no idea. The real bombshell waits until 1887, when a peasant woman near the village of El Amarna is digging for old mud bricks to use as fertilizer, sabak as they call it, and her hoe hits something hard. She pulls out a clay tablet covered in weird writing. Then another, then hundreds. She sells them to a local dealer for a few piastres, and suddenly Europe is flooded with what we now call the Amarna letters. Diplomatic mail from 300 years before Tutankhamun. Kings of Babylon and Assyria and Mitanni whining to the Egyptian court about late tribute and broken promises. And every letter is addressed to a pharaoh whose name keeps getting spelled funny, sometimes Napkariria, sometimes Nibkaria. Takes decades for scholars to realize it is just their scribes trying to write Akhenaten. His birth name Amenhotep in Akkadian with a really bad accent. By the early 1900s, everyone is obsessed. German teams start systematic digging at the city itself. House by house, street by street. They find the foreign quarter where Cretan merchants lived with their fancy spiral pottery. They find the glass factories still full of half-melted blue ingots. They find the sculptor's workshop of a man named Thutmose, and in a corner under a pile of plaster dust is the most perfect portrait bust anyone has ever seen. Quartzite eyes. Painted lips still bright. The long, elegant neck. Nefertiti looking straight at you like she has been waiting 3,000 years to be found. The Germans smuggle it out in a crate labeled machine parts, and it ends up in Berlin where it still sits behind bulletproof glass, making every visitor feel slightly judged. Meanwhile, the royal tomb in the cliffs keeps giving up secrets one slow spoonful at a time. Robbers got there, first of course. Then 19th century treasure hunters. Then proper archaeologists who at least write things down. They find smashed canopic jars with Nefertiti's name. Fragments of an alabaster coffin that once had Akhenaten's face, but now looks like it lost a fight with a hammer. And in a side chamber, a pile of bones that might be him. The skull is long. The arms are unusually long. The teeth are worn down to nubs. Doctors argue for decades. Marfan syndrome. Froelich syndrome. Some hormonal thing. Or just really enthusiastic inbreeding, finally producing the jackpot of weird. No one agrees, but everyone agrees the guy did not have an easy time walking around. The city itself keeps whispering as the sand is brushed away. Painted floors showing birds flying over marshes that have not existed for millennia. A child's wooden toy horse still with real horsehair tail. A love poem scratched on a limestone flake from a princess to her tutor that ends with the line, "My heart is not stone, it can be broken." Bread ovens still holding the shape of the last loaves baked the morning the court left forever. And everywhere the sun disk, on rings, on scarabs. On the bottom of cheap pottery bowls, like a corporate logo that went out of business overnight. By the 1920s, the name Akhenaten is back in books again. Some call him the first monotheist. Some call him a tyrant. Some call him a visionary poet. Others just call him that pharaoh with the hips. Freud gets involved, of course, because Freud gets involved in everything and writes a whole book claiming Moses stole the one God idea from him. Which is hilarious because Moses probably never existed, and Akhenaten would have hated the idea of sharing his private sun disk with a bunch of ex-slaves wandering the desert. The irony keeps piling up like sand dunes. The man who tried to erase his father's name ends up having his own name erased so thoroughly that when it comes back it is more famous than any proper pharaoh, who played by the rules. The priests who damned his soul to nothingness accidentally made him immortal, because nothing sells books like a heretic. The city he built to last forever disappears in 40 years. The gods he banned come back stronger than ever. And the one thing everyone remembers is his wife. Face staring out from a museum with that tiny mysterious smile like she knows exactly how this is all going to end. Now let us drift a little slower into the really quiet part of the story where almost nobody was looking. While the big temples were being smashed and the statues recycled into doorsteps, the ordinary people of Akhenaten just kept living their small dusty lives for a few extra years. The court sailed away with Tutankhamun, but the clerks and bakers and beer brewers and chariot mechanics did not all fit on the boats. Some stayed behind because moving is hard and the desert is honest. The city shrinks to a village, then to a few houses, then to nothing but dogs and ghosts. Archaeologists find their letters too. Not the fancy clay tablets for kings. Just limestone flakes that cost nothing and were everywhere. Workers practicing their handwriting during lunch break. A foreman complaining that the ration delivery is late again. A woman named Tentapet writing to her sister, "I miss you and the baby learned to walk, please send onions." Someone drawing a little cartoon of the overseer with donkey ears. The same stuff you would find in any office break room today, except 3,300 years old and half buried under goat droppings. In one house near the river temple, they find a child's wooden doll with real human hair still tied in tiny braids. The hair is red. Egyptian kids did not usually have red hair, so maybe the mother was a captured Libyan or just liked henna a lot. The doll has one arm missing and the face worn smooth from being loved too much. Someone placed it carefully between two bricks when the roof fell in, like they meant to come back for it later. They never did. Another house still has the dining table set, 4 pottery cups upside down. A bread loaf shape baked into the bottom of the oven. Fish bones on a plate. The family sat down for supper and then the world ended quietly. No screaming, no fire. Just the slow realization that the paychecks were never coming again and Thebes was too far to walk with children. So they finished the fish and left the dishes and walked south anyway, because staying meant starving in the place you once called home. The temples themselves become quarries for anyone who needs a flat stone. A beautiful scene of Nefertiti smiting captured enemies gets cut in half and reused as a doorstep. You can still see her elegant wrist raised forever, about to bring the club down on someone. Head, except now it is covered in donkey prints and spilled lentils. In the Great Aten Temple, the altar where Akhenaten stood every morning watching the sunrise is buried under 10 feet of sand and broken pottery. Someone later uses the spot as a toilet because why not? The heretic king's holy of holies literally becomes a latrine. The priests in Thebes would have loved that detail if anyone had bothered to tell them. Out in the desert, the boundary stelae stand alone like tired sentinels. The inscriptions are proud. This land belongs to the Aten forever, and ever my city will flourish for millions of years. The wind has been sanding the words away letter by letter for 30 centuries, and the jackals do not care about forever. Bedouin shepherds camp beside them now, and carve their own tribal marks over Akhenaten's name, because stone is stone and history is just a flat place to sharpen a knife. Back in the royal wadi, the tomb keeps giving up tiny heartbreaking things. A child's sandal made from woven reeds no bigger than your thumb. A blue faience ring with a duck on it. A lock of human hair tied with a faded ribbon. Someone's pet cat mummified and placed in a little pottery coffin with a mouse mummy for company in the afterlife. The cat still has its whiskers. The mouse is missing its tail, probably nibbled off by later mice who did not respect the gesture. And the strangest find of all. In a side room of the royal tomb, archaeologists uncover 4 tiny wooden boxes. Inside each one is a baby, not fetuses exactly. More like premature princesses born too early and too small. 2 of them still have scraps of gilded plaster masks stuck to what is left of their faces. The masks are beautiful. Delicate noses. Closed eyes. Someone loved them enough to give them proper royal treatment even though they never drew breath. One box has a little note in hieratic, just 3 words. The Aten took. That is all. No names, no dates. Just the quiet acceptance that sometimes the sun disk gives life, and sometimes it takes it back before the first cry. Those 4 boxes sit in the Cairo Museum now behind glass nobody looks at because everyone is busy taking selfies with Tutankhamun's gold mask 10 rooms away. The forgotten princesses wait in the dark exactly like they waited 3,000 years ago. The ribbon on the hair has turned to dust, but the grief is still fresh if you know where to look. The workers who buried them probably stood in the torchlight and said the same things parents still say: it is not fair. She was so small, the king will want to see her anyway. Then they sealed the boxes and sealed the room and walked out into a night full of stars that did not care about pharaohs or sun disks or broken royal dreams. Let us stay in that tomb a little longer because the air is cool there and the silence is perfect for drifting. The corridors twist deeper into the cliff like a snail shell. Every footstep echoes twice. The decorators only managed to finish a few walls before everything fell apart, so most of the plaster is still bare and waiting for paint that never came. In one half-finished chamber, someone started sketching the royal family in red outline. Akhenaten with his long neck and soft belly. Nefertiti standing just behind him with her hand resting on his shoulder like she is holding him upright. The artist never got further than the shoulders. The faces are blank ovals, the arms just stop. It looks like they are slowly dissolving into the stone. Down a side passage, the workmen left their own graffiti because even in a holy tomb people need to complain. IP son of Senator says the foreman is a lazy toad. Another guy drew a surprisingly good picture of a hippopotamus wearing a crown and labeled it the overseer of works. Someone else wrote the beer is sour and the bread is full of sand and I hate this city, may the at invite me if I lie. The same stuff you would find on a construction site toilet wall today, except carved with a copper chisel while the heretic king prayed 50 meters away. In the main burial chamber, the sarcophagus sits broken in 3 pieces like someone took a sledgehammer to it the day after the funeral. The face on the lid is gone. Just a rough oval where Akhenaten's features used to be. The corners still have Nefertiti as cartouche because no one had the heart or the orders to smash her name too. The granite is red and beautiful and completely useless now. Someone dragged it halfway out of its niche and then gave up. It has been sitting there ever since, looking embarrassed. The canopic chest is alabaster so thin you can almost see through it. The 4 lids are carved as female heads wearing the Nena's headdress because the workshop mixed up the order and no one dared tell the king his internal organs would be guarded by princess faces instead of the usual jackal, baboon, falcon, and human. The chests were smashed anyway. The jars inside are missing. Probably melted down for perfume bottles in the Ramesside period because nice stone is nice stone. Scattered around the floor are hundreds of tiny blue faience rings. The kind servants wore to show they belonged to the royal house. Someone must have torn them off the mummy in handfuls, looking for gold. They lie there like forget-me-not petals 3,000 years later, catching the flashlight beams when modern visitors walk through. Most people step over them without noticing. A few archaeologists crawl around on their knees collecting them in plastic bags like they are picking up tears. And then there is the shrine. The big golden one that was supposed to surround the sarcophagus like 4 nested boxes. Only fragments remain. Thin sheets of gold embossed with scenes of the royal family standing under the rays. Akhenaten kissing one of the daughters. Nefertiti pouring wine through a strainer into his cup. The daughters playing sistra and waving lotus flowers. All of it torn apart for the metal. The wood underneath rotted away centuries ago. What is left looks like lace made of sunlight. Someone tried to burn the fragments once. You can still smell the ancient smoke if you put your nose close enough. In a narrow corridor leading nowhere, they found a single arrowhead made of flint. Not Egyptian at all. Probably dropped by a Medjay policeman who was guarding the tomb after the court left. He must have stood there in the dark listening to robbers arguing in the distance and decided this was not his problem anymore. He put the arrowhead down and walked out and never came back. The arrowhead is in the Cairo Museum, now labeled intrusive Bedouin object, because no one wants to admit the police gave up that fast. The strangest room is a tiny chamber high up that you have to climb a modern ladder to reach. Inside are 4 shallow niches. Each one held one of those little wooden boxes with the premature princesses we talked about earlier. The boxes are gone now, but the niches still have faint traces of gesso and the imprint of tiny coffin corners. Someone painted a border of lotus flowers around each niche that never got finished. The petals stop halfway like the painters simply lost interest or ran out of blue paint or heard the news that the king was dead and the pace stopped forever. When the archaeologists first opened that room, the air inside was so dry it felt like breathing paper. A single strand of spider silk stretched from one niche to another, glittering in the torchlight. It broke the moment they stepped inside. The silence after it snapped was deeper than any silence you have ever heard. Like the room had been holding its breath for 30 centuries and finally gave up. Outside the tomb, the wadi is quiet too. The cliffs lean in close, turning the sky into a thin blue ribbon. Vultures circle overhead the same way they circled when Akhenaten's funeral procession wound its way up the path. The rock still holds the heat of the day well into the night. If you sit there long enough, you can almost hear the chanting. Not real ghosts. Just the wind moving through cracks, making that low, hollow sound Egyptian priests used for the god Amen. The same wind that erased the city now plays the same note it played when the priests came back to gloat. Somewhere down in the central city, the great temple of the Aten keeps surrendering floor by floor. Every few years a storm comes and washes another layer of sand away, revealing a new patch of painted pavement. Birds flying through papyrus. Fish swimming under boats. Ducks taking off from a pool that has not held water since the pharaohs wore sidelocks. The colors are still bright because sunlight never touched them until the roof disappeared. Archaeologists take photographs and cover them up again because the moment air hits the paint it starts to fade. So they bury the beauty to save it. The temple slowly blindfolds itself, one sandbox at a time, and the sun disk keeps rising every morning exactly the same. No feelings, no memory. Just light doing what light has done for 5 billion years. The rays still end in little hands if you carve them that way. Otherwise they just keep going past the broken cliffs and the empty palaces and the places where children once played with wooden horses and princesses who never cried. Let us float back to Thebes now, where the winners are writing the story and the losers are being quietly edited out. The priests of Amun move through Karnak like they never left. They patch the chisel marks with fresh plaster and paint new scenes of Ramesside kings offering to the proper gods. Akhenaten's name disappears under layers of gypsum and gold leaf. In some places the gouges were so deep they just build a whole new wall in front and pretend the old one never existed. The temple grows a second skin the way snakes do when they want to forget the past. At night the temple workshops glow with oil lamps. Sculptors sit cross-legged recarving Akhenaten statues into respectable pharaohs. The long skull becomes a normal Nena's headdress. The potbelly turns into a crisp kilt. The wide hips narrow under a few well-placed chisel taps. One statue that used to show him kissing a princess now shows a generic king smiting Asiatics. The princess is gone. The kiss is now a club raised over some poor prisoner's head. No one keeps the chips that fall to the floor. They get swept up with the sawdust and burned to heat the glue pots. In the quarries east of the Nile, the talatat blocks keep coming out of Akhenaten like bricks from a demolished house. They are the perfect size for filling the cores of new pylons. Tens of thousands of them stacked inside the 9th and 10th pylons at Karnak. Each block still has its original relief on the hidden side. Akhenaten driving his chariot, Nefertiti pouring wine, the daughter shaking Sistra. All of it pressed face to face with another scene, so the heretic family is literally kissing itself in the dark forever. Archaeologists in the 1970s take the pylons apart block by block to get them out again. It takes years. They lay the pieces on the ground like the world's saddest jigsaw puzzle and try to match the colors and the grain of the stone. Some scenes come back to life. Most stay broken. A hand here, a ray ending in tiny fingers there. The sun disk split neatly down the middle. In Memphis the same thing happens. Horemheb the general, who finally becomes pharaoh, uses Akhenaten's stones for his own temples. He is especially proud of a new pylon that is 90% recycled heresy. He has his name carved huge on the outside and smiles every time he walks past, knowing the heretic is holding up his monument, whether he likes it or not. The priests sprinkle holy water and burn extra incense, just to be safe. You can never be too careful with haunted building materials. Out in the worker village of Deir el-Medina, the craftsmen keep finding Amarna leftovers in their rubbish pits. A faience bead, a broken mold for an Aten plaque. Someone's lunch wrapped in a page of discarded accounts that mention year 12 of the heretic. They toss it on the pile with the onion skins and fish bones. The village children use the pretty blue rings as marbles. One little girl wears a tiny gold rosette that once decorated Akhenaten's sandal strap. She thinks it is just a shiny button. Her mother lets her keep it because the metal is thin and the king is dead and nobody cares anymore. Tutankhamun himself only lives a few more years. He grows tall enough to hunt lions and marry his half-sister Akhenaten, but not tall enough to outrun whatever killed his father. His tomb is rushed. The wall paintings are still wet when they seal the door. One scene shows him standing in a boat harpooning a hippopotamus while the sun disk watches from above. The disk still has rays ending in hands. The painters did not have time to change the style completely. The hands look awkward now that the Aten is cancelled, like they are waving goodbye instead of blessing. When Tut dies, the valley gets quiet again. His successor Ai is old and only reigns 4 years. Then Horemheb takes over and spends the rest of his life erasing every trace he can reach. He has workers climb scaffolding to chisel Akhenaten's name off the tops of obelisks. They hang in baskets like window cleaners with hammers and cold chisels tapping away at gold-filled hieroglyphs, until the gold falls out in tiny leaf by tiny leaf and flutters down to the courtyard where children scramble to catch it. Horemheb also orders the complete demolition of Akhenaten. Not just abandonment, actual demolition. Gangs of prisoners swing picks at the palace walls. The painted floors are ripped up and burned for the plaster. The columns toppled and dragged away. The city is not left to die. It is killed. By the time Ramesses II comes along 100 years later, the heresy is just a bad memory priests tell over beer. Ramesses carves his own name over everything he can reach, including a few leftover Akhenaten blocks he finds lying around. He has so many children, he runs out of original names and starts numbering them. The 19th dynasty rolls on like nothing ever happened. The Nile floods. The crops grow. The temples get richer. The sun keeps rising without comment. But memories are stubborn. In the village of Deir el-Medina, the craftsmen pass down stories about the strange king who made them draw women's bodies on men and paid them in sunlight. Old men tell their grandsons how the rations stopped one day and everyone walked south along the river until their feet bled. Some families still keep a tiny blue ring or a broken Ushabti with the sun rays on its head, hidden in a niche behind the bread oven, just in case the old gods get angry again and need reminding that this house served the Aten once too. Centuries slide past. The Greeks come, the Romans come, the Arabs come. The city stays buried. Only the cliffs remember the shape of the boundary steely. Only the river remembers where the royal barge used to drift. The rest is sand and silence and the slow patient work of wind erasing pride one grain at a time. Sometimes the desert gives things back in the gentlest way possible. In the winter of 1912, a young English archaeologist named Ludwig Burchard is riding a donkey back along the low mounds east of the river when the animal stumbles. The hoof kicks up something smooth and painted. Burchard hops down and brushes the sand away with his fingers. It is a fragment of plaster no bigger than a postcard. On it is the lower half of Nefertiti's face. The lips are still red, the chin still perfect, the skin tone the color of warm honey. He sits there in the cold morning air staring at it for a long time. Then he wraps it in his handkerchief and tucks it inside his shirt next to his heart like it is still alive. That same season, his team finds the Deutsche Orient Gesellschaft is quietly clearing the ruins of the sculptor's house P47.2 in the southern part of the city. The house belongs to a man named Thutmose, or Thutmose, master of works, chief of sculptors, favorite of the king. The compound has courtyards and workshop storerooms, and a neat little garden with a stone-lined pool that still holds rainwater when the flash floods come. On the last day before Christmas break, a workman sweeping the floor of room 19 pushes aside a pile of plaster dust and broken models and sees something staring up at him. It is the top half of a woman's head, painted limestone. One eye made of rock crystal catching the lamplight like it is wet. The pupil is black glass. The eyebrow inlaid dark blue. The skin flawless. The blue crown perfect. It is Nefertiti looking exactly like she looked the day she stood in the studio light 3,330 years earlier, while Thutmose walked around her with a measuring stick and a soft voice saying, "Please do not move, great lady, just one more moment." They lift her out of the rubble so carefully the workmen hold their breath. She is missing the left eye, probably never inserted, and the tips of the ears the lower part of the crown. But the face is untouched. The paint is fresh as yesterday. The lips still have that tiny almost smile that makes you feel like she knows something you will never guess. Burchard writes in his diary that night, "Describe it how you will describe nothing. You must see it. He orders a wooden crate lined with cotton wool and labels it in Arabic. Gibsabgus, plaster casts, because the Ottoman inspector is lazy and Christmas is coming and nobody wants paperwork. The bust sails to Germany on the SS Prinzessin Heinrich in January 1913, hidden among hundreds of boring fragments, and nobody notices. She spends the next 10 years in Burchardt's private apartment in Berlin, wrapped in silk in a cupboard. He takes her out on quiet evenings, pours himself a glass of wine, and talks to her in German about the war and the inflation and how nobody understands beauty anymore. In 1923, he finally lends her to the Berlin Museum. The first time the public sees her is 1924, and the room goes silent, like someone turned off sound. People stand in line for hours, just to look at her for 30 seconds. Old men cry. Women bring flowers. Children ask if she is a real queen or a fairy. The museum director writes that the bust has the power to make visitors forget time. He is not exaggerating. Meanwhile, back in Egypt, the city keeps coughing up quiet miracles. In the 1930s, the Egypt Exploration Society digs the north suburb and finds ordinary houses with ordinary lives frozen mid-breath. One house has a little shrine in the corner with 3 crude clay cobras wearing tiny crowns. Someone's still worshipping the old gods in secret, while the Aten stared down from every official wall. Another house has a child's alphabet practice scratched on a limestone flake. ABC in hieratic over, and over like any bored kid today writing their name on a desk. In the corner, someone added a doodle of a cat chasing a bird, and the bird is winning. In the great pit behind the North Palace, they find the remains of royal sculpture dumps. Hundreds of plaster casts, Thutmose used as models. Life masks of the princesses taken when they were toddlers with fat cheeks and milk teeth. A cast of Akhenaten's left hand, long thin fingers slightly curled like he is forever reaching for something just out of grasp. A cast of Nefertiti's shoulder and collarbone so perfect you can see the soft hollow where her necklace once rested. The plaster faces stare up from the sand with empty eye sockets, waiting for the inlay that will never come. The archaeologists line them up in rows like a silent classroom and take photographs that look like police evidence from a very polite crime. One cast is different. It is Akhenaten aged. The cheeks have fallen in. The famous long skull looks heavy. The mouth turns down at the corners. The eyes are tired. It is the face of a man who knows the experiment is failing and the sun disk will not answer questions. The cast was deliberately smashed across the forehead and thrown away face down. Someone in the studio took the failure personally. The years roll on slow and hot. World War II comes and goes. The bust hides in a salt mine with the rest of Germany's treasures, then in an American vault, then back to Berlin divided and reunited. Egypt asks for her return every few years with increasing politeness and decreasing hope. She stays behind glass, becoming more famous than any living woman, while the city that made her possible turns back into desert one sandstorm at a time. In the 1980s, a Japanese team scans the cliffs with new instruments and finds hidden rooms behind the royal tomb. They crawl in with tiny cameras and find more plaster casts, more broken statues, more evidence that the end was panic, not ceremony. One room is full of discarded heads. Dozens of them. Akhenaten, Nefertiti, the princesses, even the fat little court dwarf with his oversized wig. All smashed at the neck and piled like rubbish. The last person to leave turned off the lamp and closed the door on centuries of royal vanity. Tonight, somewhere in the Berlin night, Nefertiti still stands under soft museum lighting while guards walk past every 20 minutes and the cleaning staff hums quietly. Her one good eye follows you across the room. The missing eye is a dark hollow that makes the smile deeper and sadder. Millions of people have looked at her and felt the same small ache like meeting someone you almost remember from a dream. And out in the Egyptian desert, the wind keeps moving across the broken floors, polishing the painted ducts a little smoother every year. The sun keeps rising without hands now, just light doing its ancient job. The cliffs keep their secrets. The river keeps flowing brown and slow, carrying tiny grains of Akhenaten, downstream grain by grain toward a sea that will never know their names. Some nights when the museum in Berlin is closed, and the last guard has walked past with his keys jangling, the lights dim to almost nothing, and Nefertiti stands alone in her glass box, like she has stood alone for 100 years now. The blue crown catches the faint glow from the emergency exit sign and turns the color of deep water. The single inlaid eye glitters just enough to remind you it is made of rock crystal. And once looked at real sunrises over a real river that still flows even though the city that watched them is gone. Across the Atlantic in quiet university labs, people keep trying to solve the family like it is a very sad crossword puzzle. They take the bones from KV-55, the ones that might be Akhenaten and the two fetuses from Tutankhamun's tomb and the little premature princesses, and line them up under soft lights. They extract DNA that is more than 3,000 years old and smells like dust and old bandages. The machines hum all night, turning royal tragedies into strings of letters. In 2010, they finally announced the results in a paper so careful it almost apologizes for existing. The boy king Tutankhamun was the son of the man in KV-55. The man in KV-55 was the son of Amenhotep III and Queen Tai. The man in KV-55 had Marfan syndrome or something close enough. He walked with a cane. His skull was long and narrow. His teeth were terrible. He was probably in pain every day of his adult life. His wife was his cousin. His children were also his nieces and maybe his grandnieces. One of his daughters married him. Another daughter probably gave birth to Tutankhamun when she was about 13. Everyone in the family had the same bad hips and the same delicate collarbones and the same quiet acceptance that this was normal. The paper lists the inbreeding coefficient as higher than anything seen in modern royal families, and then politely stops talking about feelings. The internet loses its mind for a week and then forgets. The bust in Berlin keeps smiling the same half smile that does not care about DNA. Out in the desert, the excavations slow down because money is tight and the sand keeps winning. The Egypt Exploration Society finishes the north suburb and packs away the children's toys and the love letters and the little clay cobras. They cover the houses again with clean sand so the walls do not melt in the rain that almost never comes. The site photographs look like crime scenes after the police have left. Everything neat and empty and waiting for the next team in 20 years who will bring better cameras and the same heartbreak. One of the last things they find is a tiny workshop near the river. A potter's wheel still in place. A half-finished bowl collapsed in on itself because the clay dried before anyone came back to finish it. On the wall, someone painted a quick sketch in red ink. The sun disk with rays ending in hands, and under it a single line of hieratic that says, "May the Aten protect the Potter Merera forever." The paint is so faded you have to stand at exactly the right angle in the late afternoon to see it at all. The archaeologists take a photograph and promise to publish it someday. The file sits on a hard drive in London with 10,000 other photographs waiting for someone to have time. In the Cairo Museum, the forgotten things gather dust in storage. The 4 little wooden boxes with the premature princesses sit on a metal shelf wrapped in acid-free tissue. The label is handwritten in pencil, Amarna Royal Tomb Uncertain Attribution. The ribbon that once tied one lock of hair is now just brown flakes in a plastic bag. The blue faience duck ring is in a drawer with 100 other blue faience rings because no one knows which princess wore it. The plaster life mask of the tired older Akhenaten is stored face down so the smashed forehead does not upset visitors who will never see it anyway. Every few years a curator opens the drawer and thinks about putting them on display and then remembers the public wants gold and bright colors and stories that end with treasure. So the drawer closes again and the lights go out and the air conditioning hums like a lullaby for things that were never allowed to grow up. Sometimes school groups are brought down to the basement on special tours. The children stand in their neat rows and stare at the tiny coffins and the long bones and the delicate skull, with the teeth that never got to grow in properly. The guide speaks in a soft voice about how everyone was very sad and how the king loved the son too much. The children nod politely and then ask if they can see Tutankhamun's gold mask now. They are always told yes, of course, in just a minute. The lights go off again and the door closes and the premature princesses wait another year for someone to remember their names that were never written down. Back in Amarna, the wind keeps doing its slow, patient work. It polishes the painted pavements until the ducks lose their wings and the fish lose their scales. It rounds the edges of the boundaries steely until the proud words are just gentle curves. It fills the palace swimming pool with fine sand that feels like brown sugar when you let it run through your fingers. Foxes dig dens in the throne room. Owls nest in the window of appearances where the royal family once stood waving to empty streets. The moon rises over the cliffs exactly the same way it rose, the night Akhenaten died and finds nothing left to be disappointed about. And somewhere in the deep desert a Bedouin boy finds a tiny blue ring half buried beside a camel thorn bush. He picks it up and rubs it clean on his robe and slips it on his little finger because it is pretty and the desert is full of pretty things that belong to people who do not need them anymore. He grows up and the ring stays with him through marriages and children and wars and peace. When he is very old and his grandchildren ask where it came from, he says, "It is from the time when the sun had hands and the kings were kind to light." Then he closes his eyes and the ring slides off his thin finger and falls into the sand again and waits for the next child who will not know what it means either. The story keeps getting smaller and softer until it is just dust moving across dust under a sun that never learned anyone's name. Some evenings in late spring, the light over the Middle Egyptian desert turns the color of watered wine, and the cliffs above the empty bay of Akhenaten glow pink like the inside of a seashell. If you stand on the west bank and look across the river at the right moment, you can almost see the city the way Akhenaten saw it the first time. Empty, waiting, full of promise. The curve of the land is still perfect. The northern cliffs still make that gentle half-moon. The river still bends just enough to catch the reflection of the setting sun and throw it back like a polished mirror. For a few minutes, the place looks brand new. Then the light shifts and the illusion collapses, and all that is left are low sandy ridges and the faint scars where streets once ran straight and wide and optimistic. The local farmers call the area Tel El Amarna now. They plow around the mounds because the soil there is rich with crumbled mud brick and old rubbish. Every few years, a tractor blade turns up a bright blue bead or a scrap of painted plaster, and the driver stops, pockets it if it looks pretty, or tosses it into the irrigation ditch if it does not. The children follow the furrows after planting season, hunting for shabti fragments, the way children elsewhere hunt for seashells. They know the little blue figures are old and lucky, but they do not know whose servants they were supposed to be. They just like the way the glaze catches the sun when you hold it up to your eye like a secret window. Down by the river, the ferryman who takes tourists across still tells the same story his grandfather told. How the heretic king built a whole city in 14 years and it vanished in 40. How the queen was so beautiful the moon was jealous. How the king talked to the sun like it was his only friend and the sun answered by burning everything he loved. The tourists nod politely and take selfies with the cliffs in the background and never notice the tiny faience ring the ferryman wears on a leather cord around his neck. It is the same ring the old Bedouin man lost decades ago. It has been around a lot of necks since then. It fits everyone eventually. On the east bank, the Egyptian Antiquities Service keeps a small rest house for inspectors. The guardian is a quiet man named Mahmoud who has worked the site for 37 years. He sleeps in a room that was once part of a noble's courtyard. The ancient painted floor is still there under a thin layer of cement because no one had the budget to dig it up. At night he spreads his mattress right over the spot where Nefertiti's bare feet once walked carrying a sick child to the moonlight. He says the floor stays cool even in July and he dreams better there than anywhere else. Sometimes he wakes up with sand on his cheek and the faint smell of lotus oil that nobody has burned in his house for years. Mahmoud keeps a tin box under his bed with the things he has found and never reported because they are too small for the magazines and too broken for the museum. A pottery game piece shaped like a tiny lion. Half a limestone cosmetic spoon carved into a swimming girl. The lid of a coal tube with a monkey on it. A child's clay rattle that still makes a soft, dry sound when you shake it. He lines them up on the windowsill when the moon is full and talks to them the way Burchard once talked to the bust. He tells them the tourists are kind this year and the price of sugar is too high and the river is late rising. The objects listen the way only very old things know how to listen. Once a year on the day Akhenaten died, nobody knows the exact date, so they picked one. Mahmoud closes the gate early and walks alone to the royal wadi. He carries a small clay bowl of water and 7 dates because 7 was a lucky number once. He pours the water at the foot of the broken boundary, stela number 6, and places the dates in a neat row on the stone. Then he sits with his back against the cliff and waits until the stars come out. He does not pray exactly. He just sits there breathing the same air the funeral priests breathed when they carried the king past this spot wrapped in linen that smelled of cedar and grief. When the moon rises, he stands up, brushes the sand off his galabaya, and walks home. The jackals eat the dates before morning, and the water sinks into the cracks, and nobody ever knows he was there. In Berlin, the bust still waits. The museum has moved her 3 times since reunification, always to a bigger room because the crowds keep growing. They installed air conditioning that keeps her at exactly 18 degrees and 40% humidity, the way some people keep premature babies alive. The missing eye has never been found. Some say Thutmose took it out on purpose, so she would never see what became of them all. Others say it simply fell out in the sand and is waiting under a potter's house for the next tractor blade. Either way, she watches the world with 1 perfect eye and 1 dark hollow, and the combination is more human than any complete face could ever be. Every December the museum puts a small Christmas tree in her room because the visitors like it and she does not seem to mind. They wind tiny white lights around the branches and the reflection dances across her cheekbones like moonlight on the Nile used to do. Children press their noses to the glass and whisper that she is the most beautiful lady they have ever seen. Old women stand longer than anyone else remembering faces they have lost. Men look at her and then look away quickly because something about the half-smile makes them feel caught. On very quiet nights, the security cameras catch nothing moving, but the motion sensors sometimes trigger anyway. The guards check the recordings and see only the slow drift of dust motes in the air conditioning current. They blame spiders and reset the system, and never notice that the speckles of light on Nefertiti's crown rearrange themselves into the shape of a tiny hand for exactly 3 frames before dissolving again. Back in Egypt, the river keeps rising and falling the way it has done for 7,000 flood seasons before Akhenaten and will do for 7,000 more after we are all gone. The silt it leaves behind is dark and rich and smells like beginnings. Farmers plant broad beans where the great temple once stood, and the beans grow thick and sweet because the ground remembers, being fed by royal garbage and broken offerings and the bones of people who honestly tried their best. The sun keeps its ancient appointment every morning. It slides up between the cliffs exactly where Akhenaten told it to, and for a moment the light looks almost personal. Then it climbs higher and becomes ordinary again, and the illusion passes, and the day begins with tea and bread, and the sound of children walking to school along the same dusty tracks their ancestors walked when they were leaving paradise because the paycheck stopped. Everything settles. The sand finishes its patient work. The names fade until even the wind forgets how to pronounce them. And somewhere under the beans and the clover and the quiet fields, a single blue ring waits for the next small hand that will slip it on without knowing it once circled a finger that circled the world for 17 strange years before the world decided to forget. And now the story gets so quiet you can almost hear the sand settling. Years stop mattering the way they used to. Decades drift by like clouds that never quite rain. The site guardians change names and faces, but the tin box under the bed keeps growing. Mahmud retires and his son takes over the rest house. The new boy is 22 and thinks old pottery is boring until he finds a tiny faience hippopotamus with only 3 legs, and suddenly he understands why his father talked to broken things. He adds the hippo to the windowsill collection and starts leaving 7 dates at the stela himself, even though he is not sure why. The jackals still eat them before dawn. Some traditions do not need explanations. They just need someone willing to keep the bowl filled. In Berlin, the bust finally gets her own room again. They paint the walls the exact pale honey color of Amarna limestone at sunset and light her from above the way the open courtyards once did. There is a bench now so people can sit as long as they want. On slow Tuesdays, an old Egyptian tour guide named Fatma brings school groups and tells them in soft Arabic that Nefertiti is not smiling because she is happy. She is smiling because she is tired of crying, and this is what tired looks like when it is 3,000 years old and still beautiful. The children sit cross-legged on the floor and stare up at her with round eyes, and for a few minutes, the room is completely silent except for the hum of the air system breathing for her. Back in the desert, the river has shifted a little. Every century it moves a few meters west the way rivers do when they get bored. One year the flood comes higher than anyone can remember, and the water slips into the lower city for the first time since Akhenaten's barge floated there. It stays for 3 days carrying silt and frog spawn and the smell of wet earth. When it recedes, it leaves a thin dark line across the mounds like the Nile drew a new horizon and decided to keep it. Farmers find their bean fields deeper and richer. Children find their football pitches mysteriously level. Nobody realizes the river just tucked the city in the way a mother pulls a blanket higher over a sleeping child. The boundary stelae are almost gone now. The inscriptions are shallow dimples you can only read with your fingertips if you know where to press. The cliffs have started to calve in places. Huge slabs of limestone slide down every few hundred years and bury whatever is below forever. One day, Stela K will be under a rock the size of a house and no one will ever read Akhenaten's promise again. The wind is fine with that. The wind has all the time in the world. In the royal tomb, the modern steel door rusts gently. The padlock is replaced every decade, but the hinges still weep red tears when it rains. Inside the corridors are cooler than ever. The smashed sarcophagus has settled into its own dust like it finally got comfortable. The faint outline of Nefertiti's cartouche on the corner is the last carved thing still sharp enough to cast a shadow. Everything else has surrendered to the soft erosion of air too dry to forgive edges. Somewhere in the maze of half-finished rooms, a single bat has made a home. It hangs upside down from a ceiling that was never painted and sleeps all day while tourists walk underneath talking in whispers. At dusk it wakes, stretches leather wings, and flies out through a crack no human eye has noticed. It follows the same route every night across the empty bay, skimming the river for insects that taste like lotus and distant memory. When it passes over the cultivation, the farmers look up and smile because bats eat mosquitoes and everybody likes that. They call it the queen's bird, even though it is only a bat and has no idea it is flying the exact path the royal falcons once took. When they carried messages no one is left to read. The great temple of the Aten is mostly gone. The offering tables are shallow bowls full of clean sand that the wind keeps polished. If you stand in the middle at noon on the summer solstice, the shadow of the eastern cliff falls exactly across the altar the way Akhenaten planned it 3,350 years ago. The moment lasts 4 minutes. Then the shadow moves on and the sand forgets it was ever shaped like anything at all. One spring, a doctoral student from Oslo spends 3 months alone at the site mapping temperature changes inside the private tombs. She is quiet and keeps to herself and drinks tea with too much sugar. On her last evening, she walks to the North Palace where Nefertiti kept her own gardens and sits by the dried-up pool. The moon is full and the broken columns turn silver. She takes a tiny shard of painted plaster from her pocket, something she found in the sieving, screens and was supposed to register but did not, and places it on the edge of the pool. It shows the tip of a lotus petal in perfect turquoise. She says out loud in Norwegian, "Thank you for the light," and then feels silly and cries a little because nobody has thanked them for anything in such a long time. The wind moves across the pool and the shard tips over and falls in. It lands face up and the moon paints it bright enough to look wet. She leaves it there. The next morning it is already half buried, and by evening it is gone. The pool keeps the secret the way pools have kept secrets since water was invented. Years later, the same student, now a professor, brings her own daughter to the site. The girl is 8 and bored until she finds a smooth blue bead in the dust. She holds it up to the sun and the hole in the middle makes a tiny spotlight on her eyelid. She asks if it belonged to a princess. The mother says maybe and does not correct her when she decides, yes, definitely a princess who lost it while running to meet her mother under the rays of the sun. The girl puts the bead on a string around her neck and wears it until she is grown, and then gives it to her own child who loses it one day in a playground in Oslo and never notices. The bead travels inside a coat pocket across oceans and cities and seasons until it slips out somewhere and waits for the next small hand that needs a piece of forever it can actually hold. And that is how the city finally disappears completely. Not with hammers or curses or official damnation. Just with small kindnesses and forgettings, and the slow, gentle way children keep finding pieces of the light and carrying them away in their pockets without meaning to. The cliffs stay. The river stays. The sun stays. Everything else becomes the soft sound sand makes when it lands on sand. Somewhere under the beans and the clover and the quiet evening prayers of farmers who have no idea they are living on top of a miracle, the last painted duck loses its last wing. The last hand at the end of the last sun ray smooths away into nothing. The last cartouche fills with dust and forgets whose name it was trying to hold. The experiment ends the only way experiments ever really end, by becoming the ground somebody else walks on without noticing. The Nile floods again next year exactly on time. The beans grow thick and sweet. Children laugh in the same streets that once echoed with hymns nobody remembers how to sing. The moon rises over the cliffs and finds the bay empty and perfect the way it was the morning Akhenaten first stood there and told the sun, "This is where we will love you forever." The sun comes up anyway. It has seen this before. It will see it again. Light does not need an answer. It only needs a place to land. And somewhere very far away, a little girl closes her fist around a smooth blue bead that feels warm from her hand, and dreams of a beautiful lady who smiled with only one eye and waited 3,000 years for someone to carry her home in a pocket. Good night, friends. Sleep soft. The sun will be here long after all of us have turned into stories someone forgets to finish. Thank you for staying with me through all 10 parts. The desert is quiet now. So should we be.